in a previous episode, we talked about why we're bored with Star Wars. So as a companion to that, this time, let's talk about why we still love Star Wars.
I don't think I could talk about that.
You don't love Star Wars?
Hate it. All of it.
Okay. All right, then bash it.
Okay.
Now, I mean, and I feel like you have brought it up more often recently than I have through your obsession with Boba Fett. Your absolute obsession
here we go.
with Boba Fett. But so tell me about loving Star Wars, Tig. Okay. First of all, I mean, of course, as a kid, you loved Star Wars because I think
obsessed with
basically every kid our age. I know you don't follow it diligently anymore.
Not anymore.
But do you still have a fondness for Star Wars?
Yeah. I think like a lot of people our age, I was obsessed with Star Wars as a kid. Not just because they were great, but also because there was some sort of weird limited access to a lot of stuff.
Sure.
Back then. You know, like, that sounds weird because they had so many toys and everything, but I mean, there was just 3 movies, and that was that was it. You just had these 3 movies.
5 movies, because those 2 Ewok movies were amazing.
Well, but to be fair, the Ewok movies were that's true, though, because when the Ewok... I mean, I watched those when they came out.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So... But I was working at the movie theater, which I think even made it worse. But when the trailers came out, oh my god!
Oh yeah.
Like it was, I could not believe they were making a new Star Wars. And again, I feel like this is a million people saying this.
Yes.
Could not believe when the trailer came out. We got and working at the theater, we got to see it over and over, and I got to go. I would every time that. No matter what movie it was a rated G movie. Whenever that trailer came on, all the employees would walk in, so we not only could watch the trailer again, but to feel the energy of, at the time, 550 people sitting in the theater, watching a trailer, and us sitting in the back giggling because we've seen it like thousands of times, and getting all that energy off the people that are excited. But then the movies came out.
Sure.
And they were fun, but the first one was fun, but there was some lag or something. I don't know how to explain it, but I guess we all know what it was. But that did put a damper on things for me for a while.
Sure, fair enough, and that's an experience and a story I think at this point
has been talked to
a million times over. Like look, internet, we've all hashed this out before.
Right.
There's no need to have that discussion anymore, right? We get it.
But so there was that fell. I said, I guess I'm too old now or something, and then Lord of the Rings came, and I was like, oh my god, this is my new Star Wars.
Yeah.
But I am still into it, and I'm, as much as people bitch that the product has been taken over by Disney and is now being stretched to the limits of, I am thankful because there are avenues now that you could be like, well, I don't need to watch this one, but I love this one, and I don't like this one. So I mean, like we've talked about with Andor, and a couple, I'm trying to think of other things that and obviously Boba Fett, and obviously Mandalorian. It's awesome, because you could pick and choose what you want to watch.
There are options. We actually have stuff that we could sink our teeth into.
Universe. I wish that was a thing with Lord of the Rings. I wish there was somebody that was just pumping out stories that could just be you probably would be pissed off. But
I don't wish
make
that.
up the shit on the way, but I'm thankful that as much as it's stretched out and there's so much of it and some people are worn out by it, it kind of it makes the universe stay around.
I don't love it all. Some of it I don't think you're actively dislike, but I also don't follow it all.
Yeah.
And but the thing is, when it gets it right for me, it can still be exciting. It still like draws out like that 12-year-old inside me who is still excited about the idea of these spacefaring adventures and stuff like that. Like I can still get excited about it. Yes, as we talked about previously, I've I've kind of hit a point where sometimes I'm a little bored by it, but I also have the presence of mind to recognize it's not all made for me.
No.
It's not all directed towards me. There are new generations getting into this stuff, and it's okay for them to have stuff like that's for them. That's okay.
Yeah, there's enough stuff that you can pick and choose the things that you want to watch and what you don't want to watch. And it makes it nice because the Star Wars universe is a lot like the games that you've been showing me how to play. The Hex, all the strategy
like the war games. Oh yeah, okay.
Where you were like, once you learn how to play it, you can do all the other ones because they're basically the same.
Right.
That's what the Star Wars universe is like. There's a ground, So if they make a show, you don't have to learn this new universe and how it works. And you just go, it's part of the Star Wars universe. Okay, I'll try this one.
Yeah, you get the basics.
Yeah,
and so you can just dive in.
Which makes it sort of easy. It's like what they did with Star Trek.
And I still love the basics. I mean, obviously there are different eras of the Star Wars universe, but when I talk about the basics, I mean kind of like the Rebellion era, the one that we grew up with and stuff. And I love those basics. I like the idea of scrappy underdogs who are fighting against this big, giant, oppressive fascist government. I like the basics of these kind of mystical space samurai who are out there, but they're rare, and I do prefer my Jedi rare as opposed to well done. Which is to say, we don't need a ton of them.
Right.
Just but I like that idea. I like the I like the idea that living in this universe, everything is sort of cobbled together and broken down and stuff like that. And it's just like I'd love the idea of 8 billion different weird aliens all living together with humans, and this is just sort of it's a fantasy world just put in outer space.
Right.
I mean, I'm certainly not alone in saying that. Like, Star Wars looks somewhat like science fiction, but it isn't really science fiction. It's fantasy. Some people say space opera or space fantasy, and there's a bunch of different terms that get thrown on it. But it has far more in common with fantasy than it does with science fiction. But I love that. So I'm still drawn towards those aspects of Star Wars. It doesn't always get me excited the way that it used to, but when it does still get me excited sometimes, it still really gets me.
I think it was because now people complain because there's too much of it. But back in the day, I do remember as a kid people not liking Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, there were some people who hated the
They hated the Ewoks.
Understandably so, but it's also it's the thing.
But when I was a kid, I didn't mind it.
Well, yeah, and it's one of these things where it's like, and we've had to repeat this over the generations. Like, the Ewoks weren't for you;
right?
They were for kids, and the same thing started happening with the prequels and so on. And as much as that might pain older fans to accept, and Lord knows that many, many, many older fans refuse to accept the idea. It's not all for you.
Well, and
that's okay.
And I saw, and I'm sure it's on YouTube, an interview with George Lucas and how he talked about when he made the first Star Wars. Mm-hmm. There were fans. Now, nothing had been made. This is the first Star Wars, right? Nothing, Flash Gordon, but nothing had been made like this.
Right.
He said people bitched that about R2-D2 and C-3PO to him, fans, because they had too much of a sense of humor.
I'm sure.
And there should not be a sense of humor in this is space. This is supposed to be serious. And George Lucas is like, this is my fucking story. Like, don't tell me that there's not supposed to be. Like, what do you? So he was, and I think the reason he brought it up was like, this has been going on literally since the first movie.
Yeah.
I don't think that droid should have a sense of humor. That's ridiculous. It dumbs it down. So, it's all par for the course. Everyone that bitches that this and Jar Jar Binks and da-da-da-da-da-da, it's just been going on literally since the first one.
Yeah, and with stuff like that, like let's say you mentioned Jar Jar. Look, I'm not going to try to defend Jar Jar.
No, I don't
like Jar
actually
Jar.
like Jar Jar.
No, but that isn't the point. The point is like, okay, but Jar Jar wasn't for us.
Right.
Like he wasn't made for us. And like that's okay. Doesn't mean I have to like him. Doesn't mean I have to defend him because I don't. And I don't. And I won't.
But Jar Jar was C-3PO, R2, 4. Like, that was their version. Their comedy is different. Their sense of humor is different.
Here's the thing. Like, one of the primary cannon fodder villains for the prequel movies were the battle droids. Roger, Roger, and all that stuff.
Right.
I thought they were silly as hell. Cool visual design, though that's not unusual for Star Wars. Cool visual design, but very silly. I didn't like the catchphrases and all that stuff and all that, all that. However, my son loved them. He used to mimic them all the time. He loved to do the battle droid march, and he would say Roger, Roger, and all that. And even still to this day, he will sometimes, you ask him to do something.
Roger,
now, he's an adult at this point, but and he'll say like, yeah, Roger, Roger. Like it was a huge part of his childhood. Now, it clearly touched an entire generation and helped make them fans. So who gives a shit if it wasn't for me? Like, I feel like that's a positive thing. There's now there's a whole generation of Star Wars fans who their introduction were those movies.
Yeah.
Like that's
I
cool. And that generation, of course, also then got to have the same experience that we did when the sequel movies came out. Because I remember I remember my son saying when The Force Awakens came out, he's like, finally, like this, now I like this one's my Star Wars movie.
Silly boy.
And then of course he, like now looking back on the sequel trilogy, he's sort of like, well, yeah, it's sort of a mixed bag.
But that's because you become older, you become jaded, you've seen more things, you have the experience of you watching it as kids is totally different than. Yeah. It's just, it's like watching Goonies.
Fans collectively, we as fans, I include us in this, we can be sometimes far too harsh and critical about the things that we love. And I think it's in part because we demand, right, we experienced this thing when we were 12 and 13 or 16 and 17, where like they filled us with such wonder at that age. And we have this unrealistic expectation that they're always going to be able to do that these things are always going to be able to make us feel that same way again. And that's just not possible. It's like the repeated refrain you hear about SNL. Saturday Night Live hasn't been funny since. And that since is always like when you were the age for Saturday Night Live to be appealing to you. Like, everybody has a different timeline. You ask somebody, when was the last time SNL was funny? And it's like,
when you were a teenager.
Whatever their specific cast was.
Right.
And so with like stuff like Star Wars, as well as a bunch of other fan favorite franchises, you get that constantly where it's like, people still like they hit their 30s and their 40s and older, and when they're no longer getting that feeling that they had when they were 12 and 13, they're like, well, this sucks now. It's like, well, how much of that is you as opposed to the thing?
Everybody that complains online that it's not as good as it was, they're not complaining about the thing they're complaining about. They're complaining that they're upset that they no longer feel the way they did as a kid.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. Whenever like some person's like, that's not what Star Wars is the same, it's like, oh, what you're actually saying is that you're mad that when you were a kid, you knew less and things weren't, you didn't experience enough things, so when you saw that thing, it was really important to you, and now that thing doesn't exist anymore because you're old.
Yeah. So now, to be clear, The Empire Strikes Back is objectively superior to everything else ever made in Star Wars. But, it just is. But, yeah, I'm sorry.
But I was going to say, but as a kid, I loved Empire Strikes Back, but as a kid, I grew up loving Return of the Jedi. Mm-hmm. Because I was right in that was my pocket of, like...
Sure.
That's like Temple of Doom. I love all the... Indiana Jones... arguably, or I like more than the Star Wars thing, but I love Temple of Doom. It's arguably the worst out of most of them.
A lot of people feel that.
But you grow up as a kid, and it's so insane, and you've got short round, and you're just sort of. That's sort of. I think that's what it is. I think it just is like. Yes, Empire is objectively the best Star Wars movie. It is. But it matters when you saw this and that, and where you were, and what kind of like thing you were going through as a kid when you watched the movie, and blah blah blah.
And you just can't. It's just an unfair and unrealistic expectation to, in adulthood, when you have learned so much and experienced so much, seen so much, like you've seen all these things before and all that, to to think that you can suddenly get recapture that, that magic. Like if and when that kind of thing happens, it's exceedingly rare. It takes, it takes seeing something that you've never seen before, and even that you won't be able to recapture. Like I'm seeing this right now among fandom with the Marvel movies, for instance. And when the first big stretch of Marvel movies capped off with Infinity War and Endgame, Endgame in particular, there were these sort of magic moments in the theater that were kind of once in a lifetime experiences. I've never had a theater experience like I did with the Avengers Endgame. The only thing that I can remember that possibly came close prior to that was seeing Return of the King, 20 years prior, and then prior to that, it would have been probably going all the way back to the original Star Wars movie, seeing those in the theaters. But then when the Marvel movies started coming out, like movies and shows after Endgame, people were still on that high, and they're like, well, how come they're not giving me that high anymore? It's like, because
that was your first shot, baby.
Yeah, are we in fandom? Are we just a bunch of heroin addicts who are we're chasing that same first high?
Yes,
but you can't get that.
Yeah,
same high.
but you know what it is? It's because every once in a while that movie does pop up.
Yeah.
And you go, holy shit!
You get a taste of it again.
Yeah, like I think we were talking about it with Matrix or something, where you were saying you weren't a big fan, but I was like, yeah, but at the time, it fucking blew people away because of the special effects of it, not the story. But the story was a cool idea, but when Matrix came out, being someone who worked at the theater, it was fucking huge.
Oh, I
know.
It
was mind blowing.
I was even then and remain a contrarian as far as that's
now
concerned.
I don't even watch it.
But I do get it. I get why.
Yeah, at the time,
I get why it blew people's minds.
But so every once in a while, something like that, or Lord of the Rings, like when Fellowship came out, it was like, holy shit, Harry Potter, the first Harry Potter.
Yeah.
It blows your mind. So I think the problem is that when you do get punched in the face and you leave a theater or whatever, and you can't help but talk about it and think about a movie for even something serious, a serious movie, because it does happen every once in a while. You're constantly going to the theater thinking, when especially with trailers nowadays, you see the trailer and you go, holy shit, this movie's going to be big, and then you go to it and you go, ah.
The thing is that like new mind-blowing experience is almost never going to be in a franchise that you already know and love.
No.
Because you already know it.
But it happened with Endgame though, right?
Yes, but the reason it did with Endgame is because it was the culmination of a building story. Yeah, it was a big finale,
and they did such a great job with it, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. So I mean that's the kind of thing where look at it this way, like Avengers Endgame was like seeing the game-winning 3-run home run in the bottom of the ninth inning.
Right. Full count.
And then when the next game starts, and the first few innings aren't
it's like
as
the
exciting.
New season,
you're like,
almost, where you don't even care.
Why don't I feel the same way that I did when that home run was hit?
Anyone that expects to.
Yeah, well, and
you have to ground yourself a little bit in the reality of how things are.
That's why I kind of I've very much pulled back from most fandom in general. I mean, we started off talking about Star Wars, and certainly specifically about Star Wars. I do not take part in online Star Wars fandom anymore because it's toxic, it's nasty, it's perpetually negative because it's just these people who are frustrated that they're not getting their fix anymore. I've pulled back from it for that reason, but I still like to remain in touch with the part of me that still loves parts of the Star Wars universe, and Star Wars still will sometimes give me something that it's like, oh yeah, like I love this, I'm enjoying this, like I like this, and it's still there, it still has the potential to bring me enjoyment. So even though we talked previously about like I'm sort of bored with it right now, it doesn't mean like I'm done with it or I think it's all inherently bad or something. It just means that
they're not producing anything that grabs you.
Me specifically, and that's in the context of understanding that, like, look, I'm a middle-aged dude who's seen 8 billion Star Wars things before.
The more you see, the harder.
Yeah, like they have an uphill climb, and that's not their fault. Like that's just my life experience. I'm sure there are lots of young people right now, like in their teens, who are seeing some of this stuff, and they're like, "Hell yeah!"
Yeah, exactly.
And and 20 years from now, they're going to be having the same conversation.
And that's what kills me about people online who will talk shit about things because they had the fix and they've been taking the Star Wars drug for 40 years and they've built up such a tolerance to it that they're like, it's just garbage, because there are kids that are probably reading that online going, well, I mean, I love it. Yeah. And then they don't want to say anything online because they don't need to jump on them when they say online, like, well, I think it's a great movie. It's a lot of fun, because they're going to get shot down by that guy saying, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like, get some perspective. Like, you mentioned the Boba Fett show, for instance. Now, I personally, I thought it was one of the worst Star Wars things I've ever seen. I thought it was really bad. However, I've spent practically no time, like, making that opinion known, because who gives a rat's ass what I think about that? And I've seen a lot of fans online who enjoyed it for what it was. Like they liked the character, or they liked his whole experience with the Sand People, or they liked various aspects of it. And I'm just kind of like, cool, all right, like yeah, great. So it might not have been for me, but if it was for you, that's awesome. Like,
how could you not?
I just
everything about Boba Fett. And all the back Star Wars stuff, like, right, the Sand People, they were kind of mysterious. You didn't know much about them.
That's true.
And now you get to, like, and he's interacting with them, and he's becoming friends with them, or the Jabbas, just like a bunch of other kids and shit going on.
I did like the Hutts getting involved.
The Rancor, the whole Rancor scene with the, he gets that as a pet, and I think that's because the return and like that Return, the first half of Return of the Jedi is always still one of my favorite.
Yeah.
Like pre-Ewok, like that one half is like,
oh yeah,
there's so much going, and I feel like that is Boba Fett. That's the show Boba Fett. It's like, holy shit, this is just a sequel to the first half of Return.
All the Jabba stuff is awesome, and even in the second half, obviously the Ewoks haven't aged well for me, because as a kid I liked them.
Yeah.
But as an adult, obviously I don't. But the space battle is still incredible.
Yeah.
And Luke's confrontation with the Emperor and Vader is still fantastic. So like I think with some quibbles here and there, Jedi is still awesome. Right. It's still super fun. And of course, Star Wars and the Empire Strikes Back are both still just fantastic movies. For what they are,
I agree with you though. I hope the old guard will soon get bored of being so negative.
It's angry. Like I think that's why when we talked about it previously, I very purposely phrased it as being bored. Mm-hmm. Not angry or hate or anything like that. My heart is not filled with hate for Star Wars.
No.
I am ready to love it again at any moment. My heart is open to it. And while I don't love everything that is being done in Star Wars, I know that at any time when the right thing comes along, I will love it. Like Andor is a great example.
Yeah.
Like Andor came out and I was like, oh man, yeah, this is some Star Wars stuff I've always wanted to see. The first season of Mandalorian was very much like that. I have hopes that some future stuff is going to be like that. I think there's talk that a movie is in the works featuring Rey.
Okay.
Who was the new Jedi for the sequel trilogy. And while I have my misgivings about the sequel trilogy, I really liked her as a character. I liked the actress. I can't remember her name, but I liked the actress. I liked the character. And absolutely, yeah, give me some adventures like featuring her. I'll be on board to see them as long as they're good. I'm there. I'm there for it.
I agree.
Star Wars is still when Star Wars is still fun. It's still lots of fun.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the best stuff I've found is slightly more off the beaten path. Like in recent years, Star Wars Rebels, the animated show, really scratched the itch for me big time. I love that show. All 4 seasons are completely worth watching. When I recommend it to people, I always say, like, the beginning of the first season, it feels much more like a kid's show. By the end of that first season,
it grows up a little bit.
It grows up a little bit, and then like seasons 2 through 4 are just there's just a great story that unfolds, throughout it. I I love it. It's a great show, and it's set just a little before the original Star Wars movie. It's in that era that I really like. It has that vibe that I like. It's the same, like a little scrappy bunch of guys. It's cool stuff. Like Star Wars, when Star Wars still has it, it still has it. Period.
I agree.
So, I might be bored, but I still love it.
I agree.
Okay, that's it then.
I don't know what fucking more you want from me. Other than the fact that just admit that Boba Fett is a cool character.
I don't want to. I don't want to. However, I really liked, was it Tamora Morrison, I think is his name, the actor. I really liked the actor who played Jango, and I thought he was a cool character. The look of Jango was awesome, and the fight on, what's the water planet, or whatever the cloning, the fight between him and Obi-Wan at the cloning facility, out in the rain, out on the platform, was an awesome fight.
Right.
Well, the chase through the city was also very cool, but that fight, awesome fight, one of the highlights of the movie. Attack of the Clones isn't the best of the prequels, but that was a really cool fight. Totally enjoyed it. Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan was fantastic. So that was that's actually one of my favorite scenes from the prequel movies. So for that alone, I'm glad that Jango exists. Even I might not be his biggest fan, but for that scene, I'm happy that he exists because I got that. So that was cool.
Nice.
So that's it.
That's all I'll get.
All right, I'm gonna hit the thing.